I was stuck in this tiny town in Alaska. Seriously tiny. I'd been there almost a week, waiting to get the perfect shot. My job was simple enough: capture the wild Alaskan wilderness for some travel magazine. But something about those endless forests, the way they just went on and on, parents no sleep, and the creepy silence at night, it was getting to me. I thought I'd find this peaceful, beautiful place, but it was more like everything was holding its breath, waiting for something bad to happen. So, there I was, in this dimly lit diner, trying to warm up with a cup of coffee that had gone ice cold. The place was pretty much empty, just a few locals minding their own business. I was scrolling through the pictures on my camera, trying to find something, anything, that was worth publishing when the door creaked open and this guy walked in. He looked like he'd seen a lot, you know. Grizzled beard, weathered face, probably in his 50s. He slid into the booth across from me, gave me a nod, and ordered coffee. We sat there in silence for a while, which was fine by me. It kind of fit the whole vibe of the place. Just as I was about to head back to my motel, he started talking. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, his voice rough, like he'd been smoking since he was a kid. "Nope, just passing through," I said. "I'm a photographer." I held up my camera like that explained everything, taking some shots for a project. He nodded and took a sip of his coffee. "Not much to see around here," he said. But the way he said it made me think he knew something I didn't. "Unless you're looking for something specific," he added with a glint in his eye. I shrugged, just trying to capture the landscape, the feel of the place. But honestly, it's getting a little boring. How many trees and mountains can you shoot before they all look the same? He chuckled, this dry, humorless sound. "Yeah, I can see that. But there are things around here that aren't on any map. Places that aren't for tourists." Okay, now he had my attention. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The guy looked around the diner, like he was making sure nobody was listening. He leaned in closer. "Old military base," he whispered. "Out past the tree line, near the old logging road. Been abandoned for decades. Most folks don't even know it's there." "An abandoned base," I said, not really believing him. "What's it doing out here?" He shrugged. "They built it during the Cold War, back when they thought they needed a place out here, far away from prying eyes. Never really said what it was for, but they shut it down quick. Too quick, if you ask me." I could feel my curiosity growing. Even though I knew I should probably just let it go, I couldn't help myself. "You ever been out there?" I asked. "Once," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Years ago. Didn't stay long. Didn't like the feel of the place. Too quiet, like it was waiting for something." I leaned back, trying to process what he was saying. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as some local ghost story, but the other part of me, the part that always got me into trouble, was hooked. "How do I get there?" I asked, trying to sound casual even though my heart was starting to beat a little faster. He hesitated, and for a second I thought he wasn't going to tell me. But then he sighed, like he knew I wouldn't give up. "You take the old dirt road out past Miller's Creek. Follow it for about 5 miles, then take the first right. You'll see a chain link fence. It's rusted and broken in places, but you can get through. Just be careful, doll." "Careful," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took another long sip of his coffee, staring into the dark liquid like it held the answers. "There's things out there," he said finally. "Things you don't want to mess with. I'm not saying you'll find anything, but if you do, you'll wish you hadn't." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. I tried to remind myself that I was a grown man, not some kid scared of the dark. "I appreciate the warning," I said, trying to sound confident, "but I think I'll be fine." He just looked at me, his eyes dark and serious. "Maybe you will," he said quietly. "But just remember, some things are abandoned for a reason." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and finished my coffee. The conversation had left me feeling uneasy, but also more determined than ever. Whatever was out there, I wanted to see it for myself. I needed to. I spent the rest of the evening trying to find out anything I could about this base. But there was practically nothing. A few mentions online of a base that was active in the 60s, but no details, no photos, no explanation of why it was shut down. It was like someone had scrubbed it from history. Which, of course, made me even more curious. The next morning, I packed up my camera gear, a flashlight, and some other essentials. I wasn't planning on staying long, just long enough to snap a few pictures and see what the fuss was about. Figured I'd be in and out in a couple of hours tops. The drive out there was way longer than I expected. The Broad was barely a trail in some places, and it wound through the forest like a snake, so I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. It felt like I was driving deeper and deeper and deeper into nowhere. And I swear, I kept getting this feeling that I was being watched. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, though, there was nothing there. After about an hour, I finally saw the fence. Just like the guy in the diner described it, rusted, falling apart, with huge gaps where it had been broken or cut away. I pulled up to the gate, which was hanging by a thread, and got out of the car. The wind was blowing, and I could smell the damp earth and pine needles. For a second, I almost turned back, but then I saw the base. It was bigger than I expected, a bunch of low concrete buildings with peeling paint and broken windows. No signs, no markings, nothing to say what it had been used for. Just rows of dark, empty windows staring back at me. I took a deep breath, grabbed my camera, and stepped through the gate. The ground was soft and uneven, covered in dead grass and mud. I could see old equipment scattered around, rusted pipes, broken crates, and the occasional piece of machinery that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. It was creepy, but also kind of fascinating, like walking through a ghost town. I started taking pictures, trying to capture the whole desolate vibe of the place. But the further I went, the more I felt like I shouldn't be there. Like the air was getting heavier, colder, like the base itself was trying to push me away. I was about to turn back when I saw the entrance to one of the buildings. The door was hanging off its hinges, and I could see a staircase leading down into the darkness. I knew I shouldn't go down there, but I also knew that if I didn't, I'd always regret it. So, I took a deep breath, turned on my flashlight, and stepped inside. It was freezing down there, and the air smelled like damp concrete and something elsey, something I couldn't quite place. My footsteps echoed off the walls, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Like something was down there with me, just out of sight. But I kept going, my parents long asleep, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I had a feeling it wasn't going to be good. I found myself in a long hallway. There were doors on either side, most of them hanging open, leading to small rooms that looked like they'd been offices. Papers were scattered everywhere, chairs were overturned, and there were even a few old military jackets still hanging on hooks. It was like they'd abandoned this place in a hurry. I took a few pictures, but the whole time I felt this wrongness. like the place was frozen in time, and I was messing with something I shouldn't. As I moved down the hallway, I started to hear noises. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized it was something else. A soft clanking, like metal on metal, and a rustling, like something was moving around. I stopped to listen, but the sound stopped too. I shook my head, trying to tell myself it was nothing, just old pipes or maybe an animal. But my heart was pounding, and I found myself gripping my flashlight a little tighter. At the end of the hallway, there was a door that was slightly ajar. I hesitated, but I couldn't resist. I pushed it open and stepped inside. This room was small, with bare concrete walls and a control panel against one wall. It looked like some kind of operations center, with switches and dials, though most of them were covered in dust. I walked over to the panel, wiping away the dust, and saw that some of the switches were still functional. One in particular caught my eye, a big red switch right in the center. Against my better judgment, I flipped it. A low hum filled the air, and the lights down the hallway flickered for a second. Then, just as quickly, they went out again. But that wasn't the worst part. From somewhere deep in the base, I heard a sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing through the darkness. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The footsteps were distant, but they were getting closer. And there was something about them, they didn't sound human. They were too heavy, too deliberate. Like something was dragging itself through the dark. I backed away from the control panel, my eyes darting to the door. I needed to get out of there. But as I turned to leave, the door slammed shut. I lunged for the handle, my hands shaking, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped, and the footsteps were getting closer. I was panicking, trapped in this dark room, with something I couldn't even imagine coming for me. My mind was racing. I had to get out. I scanned the room, desperate for another way out, and that's when I saw it, a vent cover near the floor. It was small, but maybe, just maybe, I could squeeze through. I dropped to my knees and started prying at the screws, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the screwdriver. The scraping of metal seemed deafening in the silence. Just as I managed to loosen one of the screws, the door creaked open a little further. I glanced over my shoulder, and my flashlight beam caught a glimpse of something. A shadow, long and distorted, creeping across the floor towards me. I didn't wait to see any more. I yanked the vent cover off, shoved it aside, and wriggled into the vent. It was cramped and dusty, but it was better than being in that room. Through the vent, I saw the door swing open. My flashlight beam flickered across the floor, but whatever was standing there was hidden in the shadows. I could hear it breathing, though. A horrible, raspy sound. Then it took a step forward, dragging its feet across the floor. For a split second, I saw it. It was hunched over, almost human-shaped, but its limbs were all wrong. Its skin was pale, almost see-through, and I could see places where it looked like it was peeling. But its face, if I couldn't see it clearly, but there was something wrong with it. Its eyes were too dark, like holes that sucked in the light. It stopped near the control panel, just inches from where I was hiding. I held my breath, praying it wouldn't see me. Then, after what felt like an eternity, it turned and shuffled out of the room. I waited until I couldn't hear its footsteps anymore. Then I crawled out of the vent. The room felt even colder now, and the air was thick with fear. I had to get out of there, but I also needed to know what was going on. I looked at the control panel. If that thing had been so interested in it, maybe it held some answers. I walked over to it, and my eyes fell on a switch that was different from the others. It was marked with one word: containment. My mind screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't resist. I flipped the switch. The building shuddered, and a low hum filled the air. The lights flickered on, and a set of screens above the panel came to life. They showed live feeds from different parts of the base: empty hallways, decaying equipment, and then a long corridor lined with thick metal doors. Something was moving in that corridor. It was the same creature I'd seen in the room, but now I could see there were more of them. 3, maybe 4, all moving slowly, aimlessly. Then the screen flickered, and a message appeared: "You shouldn't be here. Leave before it's too late." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my flashlight and ran. The hallway outside was empty, but I could hear those dragging footsteps again, closer now. I ran, my boots pounding on the concrete floor. I had to find the exit. But as I turned a corner, I skidded to a halt. The hallway was different. Doors that had been on the left were now on the right. It was like the building itself was changing, twisting into a maze to keep me trapped. I could hear the creatures getting closer. I picked a direction and ran, hoping it would lead me somewhere, anywhere but here. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. I could see movement out of the corner of my eye, but I didn't dare stop. Finally, I saw a door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar. I didn't care where it led. I just needed to get out. I threw myself against the door and stumbled through. I found myself in a large room, and in the center was a massive glass chamber. Inside, I could see something horrifying. It was humanoid, but its proportions were all wrong. Its limbs were twisted, its skin pale and stretched. And its face, I couldn't see it clearly, but I knew it was something I never wanted to see again. I stumbled back, my stomach churning. What had they been doing here? Then I heard a noise behind me. I spun around, and my flashlight caught a glimpse of movement. Something darted across the floor, too fast for me to see what it was. The lights flickered on, revealing more of the room. I saw a desk against the wall, covered in papers. I grabbed a file and flipped it open. There were photos of the base, diagrams of the underground chambers, and then pictures of the experiments. One photo showed the creature in the chamber, but it hadn't been so deformed back then. It looked almost human, but its eyes were wide and dark, and its mouth was open in a silent scream. Another photo showed a team of scientists standing around the chamber, their faces blank. I flipped to the next page, and my blood ran cold. A handwritten note scrawled across the paper: "Experiment compromised. Attempted control failed. Do not release under any circumstances." I dropped the file. It was all starting to make sense. They had tried to control something they didn't understand. And now, decades later, it was still here. A crash made me jump. The glass chamber had shifted, and the creature inside was moving. It was trying to get out. I ran for the exit, my heart pounding. I could hear the creature growling behind me. I climbed a ladder, my hand scraping against the metal rungs. I reached the top, threw open the hatch, and slammed it shut. I didn't stop running until I was outside, in the cold air. I could see my car in the distance. I ran towards it, my lungs burning. I got in the car, slammed the door, and jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I tore out of there. As I drove, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something chasing me. But there was nothing. Just the dark, empty road. I made it back to town, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had unleashed something terrible. something that wouldn't stay contained. I tried to sleep that night, but the images of the base and the creatures haunted my dreams. When I woke up, I knew I had to go back. I had to find out what was really going on. I drove back to the base, the road seeming even longer and darker this time. I felt like I was walking into a trap, but I couldn't turn back. I found my way back to the control room. The monitors were still dark, but the air was thick with tension. I could feel them watching me. I searched the room, looking for anything I had missed, and that's when I found it through a journal tucked away in a drawer. I opened it, and my heart sank. The writing was frantic, filled with fear and desperation. The researchers had been trying to control something, but it had become too powerful. They had lost control. The last entry was chilling. We were wrong. It's not a subject. It's a signal, and it's calling to them. We can't stop it. If anyone finds this, the sentence trailed off. I dropped the journal. A signal. What did it mean? Then I heard it. A rhythmic sound like a heartbeat pulsing through the walls. I turned my flashlight, and that's when I saw it. One of the monitors had come to life. It was showing the corridor with the metal doors. But this time, the doors were open. They were out. I ran, the sound of the heartbeat echoing in my ears. I had to get out. I stumbled through the corridors, the walls seeming to close in around me. I could hear the creatures getting closer. Finally, I saw a light at the end of a hallway. I ran towards it, hoping it was a way out. The room was different from the others. It was clean, almost sterile, and in the center was a massive console, covered in screens. One screen showed a live feed of the corridor I had just come through. And there, on the screen, was me. I turned around, but there was nothing there. I looked back at the screen, and that's when I saw it. Movement behind me. I whipped around, but the hallway was still empty. Yet on the monitor, I could see it clearly. A dark figure creeping up behind me. It was following me. I scanned the console, trying to find something that would explain what was happening, and then I saw it. A small notebook wedged between two panels. I grabbed it and flipped it open. The pages were filled with diagrams and notes, signal interference, broadcast disruption, psychological manipulation, and then one line underlined repeatedly. It's not them. It's us. I didn't understand, but I could feel the truth of it. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't about containing something. It was about controlling it. They had found a way to send out a signal that could manipulate the mind, make you see things that weren't there, hear things that weren't real, and I had been caught in it. I had to get out. I ran back into the hallway, the hum growing louder. It was in my head now, a constant drone. I could see the exit, a sliver of light in the distance. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the pain in my legs. I burst through the door and stumbled outside, collapsing on the ground. I lay there, gasping for breath, feeling the wind on my face. But then I heard it, the hum. It wasn't coming from the base. It was coming from inside me. I sat up, my head spinning. It hadn't stopped. It was in my mind, and it wasn't going away. I got to my feet and staggered towards my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. The engine roared to life, and I drove away. But the hum followed me. I drove for hours, but it didn't matter. The hum was still there, a constant presence in my mind. It was like a part of me now. I don't remember how I made it back to the motel. I must have passed out at some point. When I woke up, the hum was still there, faint but persistent. I couldn't escape it. It was inside me. I checked out of the motel and drove away, not knowing where I was going. But I knew there was no escape. The signal had me now, and it wasn't going to let go. As I drove, the hum grew louder, and I could see them, dark shapes moving in the corners of my vision. They were waiting. They were real. I had brought them out, and now they were free. I don't know how this ends. Maybe it never does. Maybe the signal will keep spreading until there's nothing left but the hum. But if you're reading this, if you found this, then please don't come looking for me. Don't try to find the base. Some things are abandoned for a reason. And whatever you do, don't listen to the signal.